Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I am here with my video to talk about the winners and ceremony for the 91st Academy Awards. I'm going to tell you what I think of the winners, and what I thought of the ceremony, and what I personally would have liked to have seen won in certain categories. So let's get started. So now, leading up to the 91st Academy Awards, there was a lot of drama going on, way more drama than you would think an awards show would experience before it even hit the airwaves. And it's been happening ever since last year, because last year's Oscars were the lowest rated Oscars in history, so ABC was frantically trying to come up with ways to bring up the ratings for this year. First, they convinced the Academy to create a Best Popular Film category, and almost immediately there was a wave of massive backlash. I literally counted only like 2 Hollywood figures who supported the idea of a Best Popular Film category. I believe they were Mark Wahlberg and Jason Blum, I think were the only 2 at least I could find that thought the category was a good idea. But no, the category was a bad idea because, for one thing, it didn't even define what a popular film is. Like, how much money did it need to make at the box office? Did critical reviews also play a part? I mean, the guidelines didn't even say. And eventually the backlash was so severe they had to cancel the category altogether. And it's a good thing they did, because if you looked at this year's Best Picture nominees, a good chunk of them were big blockbusters, and by that I mean they made hundreds of millions of dollars, like Black Panther, Bohemian Rhapsody, A Star is Born. I mean, there were some big hits in contention this year, so we never even needed the category to begin with. Then there was the host drama. Kevin Hart was announced as the Oscar host in December, and almost immediately some old tweets of his from like 10 years ago, in which he made some extremely homophobic jokes, were resurfaced. Kevin Hart didn't really want to apologize for them, saying, he was like, "That was years ago, I've moved on, I don't need to say I'm sorry." But the Academy was like, "Apologize or you're fired." So Kevin Hart decided to voluntarily step down as host. And I know some people like Ellen DeGeneres tried to convince the Academy to hire him back, and I guess the Academy said they were willing to have him come back if he wanted to, but Kevin Hart ultimately decided not to host the Oscars because he said, in his words, he did not want to be a distraction from the nominated films. And I think that was a good move on his part. Maybe he'll host the Oscars someday, but this year wasn't a good idea, especially after all that. Then there was the category placements, or rather the decision to remove some of the categories from the on-air broadcast and have them be presented during the commercial breaks, like they do with the Tony Awards. And almost immediately there was a massive wave of backlash, just like there was with Best Popular Film, because the categories they wanted to eliminate this year were categories like cinematography and editing, and the idea was to have a different set of categories presented in the commercial breaks every year. But all the guilds wrote like massive letters of protest saying, "How dare you remove this from our telecast? We deserve to be honored just as much as the main stars." And I completely agree, and the Academy did eventually reverse it, and all 24 categories were aired live on the air. Then there was the drama that the acting winners from last year were supposedly not being brought back to present this year's acting categories, because apparently the Academy and ABC felt they weren't ratings worthy, and they wanted like big name stars that everybody recognized to present them. Well, they did reverse that, but they kind of did it differently, where they had 2 of the acting winners from last year present the top 2 acting categories of lead actor and actress, and have other people present the supporting categories. Which I personally think, just keep the acting winner tradition the way it's always been. Have the supporting actress winner from last year present this year's supporting actor, etc., etc. You know, there's no really any need to change that. It's okay to have like a lot of big name stars from the year's biggest movies present the other awards, but you should always have the acting winners from last year present all 4 acting awards, unless they decline to come to the ceremony, which sometimes happens, or in the very rare case they might already be dead, but that's very, very rare, obviously. And then, of course, have someone like either a really big name or an old industry legend present Best Picture, which they did do by having Julia Roberts present because she's one of the biggest movie stars in the world, and this was actually her first time presenting the Best Picture Oscar. Anyway, that was the drama leading up to the ceremony, but now it's time to talk about the winners and the ceremony itself. So here are the winners for the 91st Academy Awards. Best Art Direction, Black Panther. Production design by Hannah Beechler, set decoration by Jay Hart. I had mispronounced Hannah Beechler's name in my nominations video because it was spelled Beachler. I assumed it was pronounced Beechler because the word beach is in there, but her name was announced as Beechler on the Oscar telecast, so I assume that is the correct pronunciation. I highly doubt she watched my previous video, but in case somehow she did, I apologize for the mispronunciation. Best Cinematography, Alfonso Cuarón, Roma. Best Costume Design, Ruth Carter, Black Panther. Best Film Editing, John Ottman, Bohemian Rhapsody. Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Greg Canham, Kate Biscoe, and Patricia Dehaney, Vice. Best Original Score, Ludwig Göransson, Black Panther. Best Original Song, Shallow from A Star is Born. Music and lyrics by Lady Gaga, Mark Ronson, Anthony Rossimondo, and Andrew Wyatt. Best Sound Editing, John Warhurst and Nina Hartstone, Bohemian Rhapsody. Best Sound Mixing, Paul Massey, Tim Cavagen, and John Casali, Bohemian Rhapsody. Best Visual Effects, Paul Lambert, Ian Hunter, Tristan Miles, and J.D. Schwalm, First Man. Best Animated Short Film, Bao, Domi Shi and Becky Neiman Cobb. Best Live Action Short Film, Skin, Guy Nativ and Jamie Ray Newman. Best Documentary Short Subject, Period End of Sentence, Reka Ziptopchi and Melissa Burton. Best Documentary Feature, Free Solo, Elizabeth Chai, Vasar Helyi, Jimmy Chin, Evan Hayes, and Shannon Dill. Best Foreign Language Film, Roma from Mexico, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, Rodney Rothman, Phil Lord, and Christopher Miller. And there was another name I mispronounced in my nominations video. I believe I pronounced Bob Persichetti's name as Bob Persichetti. So, again, I apologize for that mispronunciation. Best Original Screenplay, Nick Vallelonga, Brian Curry, and Peter Farrelly, Green Book. Best Adapted Screenplay, Charlie Wachtel, David Rabinowitz, Kevin Wilmot, and Spike Lee, Black Klansman, based on the book by Ron Stallworth. Best Supporting Actor, Mahershala Ali, Green Book. Best Supporting Actress, Regina King, If Beale Street Could Talk. Best Actor, Rami Malek, Bohemian Rhapsody. Best Actress, Olivia Colman, The Favorite. Best Director, Alfonso Cuarón, Roma. Best Picture, Green Book. Jim Burke, Charles B. Wessler, Brian Curry, Peter Farrelly, and Nick Vallelonga, producers. Alright, so here are my thoughts on all the winners. So for Best Art Direction, Black Panther's art direction was very impressive, especially with the way they created the fictional African nation of Wakanda. And I really loved the fantasy sci-fi elements of it, but I personally think The Favorite should have won, because admittedly I am a big sucker for historical period films, and just the way they recreated 18th century Britain in this film was just absolutely magnificent. For Best Cinematography, I'm so glad Roma won this. It easily deserved this win. The way this movie was shot in black and white, everything from the angles to the way the camera captured the actors' faces to just the scope of the film just looked absolutely magnificent, whether you were watching it in a theater or on your TV screen because it was on Netflix. It was just one of the most stunningly beautiful films I have ever seen in terms of cinematography. Best costume design. The costume design in Black Panther was pretty cool, and it's definitely a step up beyond what you typically see in a superhero film. Not that superhero costumes are bad, but to me they don't stand out as much as, say, costumes for a film like The Favorite do. However, Black Panther, of course, ups the ante by incorporating a lot of African tribal designs into the costumes for the royal family and the citizens of Wakanda, which I think is partly the main reason why it won here. And it is admittedly very different than what you normally see win this category, although I personally would have liked to have seen The Favorite win because, you know, again, I am a sucker for historical films, and the costume design in The Favorite was just absolutely magnificent. Sometimes with period films, the costumes can either look really amazing or look really cheap, as if they were made for like a high school stage production. Thankfully, though, this one is the former and not the latter, and the costume design in The Favorite just looks absolutely beautiful. Everything from the robes of Queen Anne to all the clothes that everyone in her court wears, to just the overall feel of 18th century England and its clothing, particularly amongst the royalty, really comes to life in this movie. Best film editing. Clearly, this is one of those rare times where Hollywood has a different view of a movie than critics do, because Bohemian Rhapsody only has a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is barely fresh, and literally the only award Bohemian Rhapsody lost was Best Picture. And of course, Bohemian Rhapsody has come under fire from a lot of people. Some are very angry over the fact that Bryan Singer still received director credit despite being fired from the movie, and of course, Bryan Singer has been accused of sexually abusing teenage boys. He's been accused before in the past, but now, like, accusations are really starting to hit the fan for him. And then, of course, there's also been accusations of extreme historical inaccuracies in the depiction of the band, or of just Freddie Mercury's life in general. But obviously, Oscar voters aren't necessarily historians, and obviously don't necessarily measure films in terms of accuracy, because Braveheart famously swept through the 1996 Oscar ceremony, which technically honored the films in 1995, and that film has been trashed by many people for its historical inaccuracies. But with Bohemian Rhapsody, while the editing was fine, I wouldn't say it was awards worthy. I wouldn't be surprised if some sympathy votes went in here due to the fact that the film's editor, John Nauman, admitted he pretty much had to salvage the film once Bryan Singer was fired and was replaced by Dexter Fletcher. Personally, I think out of these nominees, BlacKkKlansman should have won, because it was my favorite film of 2018, and I felt it was much more streamlined in its editing. That movie was nearly 2.5 hours long, and if it didn't have great editing, it would have fallen apart, because there's a lot of slow moments and then a lot of quick tense moments, and if you don't have great editing holding those two types of moments together, your film just is dead on arrival. Best makeup and hairstyling. Vice was easily going to win this category, and it deserved to, because the makeup in that movie is just absolutely incredible. Like, you really have to pinch yourself when watching it to think, is that really Christian Bale as Dick Cheney? Because he is completely unrecognizable. And yeah, you obviously have all the other actors turned into their characters, like Amy Adams as Lynn Cheney, Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld, Sam Rockwell as George W. Bush, Tyler Perry as Colin Powell. But Christian Bale's transformation into Dick Cheney was easily the most impressive, because it was the one that kind of made him the most unrecognizable of all the cast. However, this also led to the most awkward moment of the night, because the three makeup artists gave what is one of the most awkward acceptance speeches I've ever seen. They were reading off a piece of paper, as a lot of winners usually do, but they were taking turns thanking people, and they were just awkwardly pausing as they were wondering who to thank next, I guess. I mean, I was just like, just wrap up already. Because here's the thing. If you're part of a group of people nominated together for the same award, even if it looks like you have no chance of winning, Either do these two things. Have one person speak for everyone in the group, so that way you can get off the stage faster, or make a list specifically of who each person will thank if each person does indeed come up to the microphone to give a speech. That way, there's no awkward silence or confusion like there was here. For Best Original Score, Black Panther's score was very good, but I would have liked to have seen If Beale Street Could Talk win, because that movie's score literally feels like it was its own character. A lot of times some of the greatest movie scores feel like a separate character in the whole movie and give it extra dimension and depth. Because If Beale Street Could Talk score becomes very swelling and emotional in all the key moments and just really adds to the dramatic tension of the film. Best Original Song. Shallow was easily going to win this. There was no doubt in pretty much anyone's mind, especially given the fact that they put it as the last of the songs to be nominated for Best Original Song. And I'll talk about the song performances when I get to the ceremony review. But it easily deserved the win here out of these nominees. Best Sound Editing. I imagine the Live Aid sequence at the end of Bohemian Rhapsody is one of the main reasons why it won this award. But A Quiet Place really should have won this just because of how they managed to utilize sound in terms of not only the aliens in the film, but also the tense dramatic moments where the family literally has to avoid making any sound so that they won't be hunted by these aliens. And Best Sound Mixing, again with Bohemian Rhapsody, again with the Live Aid sequence helping it win here, but out of these nominees, First Man should have won because how they recreate the sounds of 1960s spacecraft and everything else that goes with that really put it over the top for me, and just, it felt magnificent to hear it while I was watching it in the theater. Best Visual Effects. I know a lot of people are disappointed that Avengers Infinity War didn't win this, but I'm glad First Man won, because in my opinion the best visual effects shouldn't be the film that has necessarily the most visual effects, but rather the most realistic visual effects. Now, a lot of films that have a ton of visual effects can be very good, but for me it doesn't matter whether the film is full of many special effects or is more subtle with special effects, kind of like with First Man, where to me it's about what looks the most realistic in the context of the film. And First Man, it looked very realistic and breathtaking. I mean, it seriously felt like that they actually went into space to make this movie. Best Animated Short Film. All these shorts were really cute, and Bao was a very cute short, and that was the most well-known of these because it played in front of Incredibles 2. But personally, I would have liked to have seen Weekends win this, because like Bao, it has no spoken dialogue, but the story that it tells is very compelling. I mean, Bao's story is certainly very compelling, but Weekends kind of takes it a little further, in which we see a boy going back and forth between the homes of his divorced parents, and how life with his mom is different from life with his dad, and, you know, I can't really say any more because then I would have to give away spoilers, but if you somehow manage to find Weekends, watch it because it's really incredible. Best Live Action Short Film. This was certainly an interesting category because the live action short films tend to be very dark and serious, and this year some would say some have criticized them for maybe being too dark and too serious and being what some would call misery porn, because pretty much all these films feature people, particularly children, put in serious situations, many of which literally involve life or death. In fact, the only one of these shorts in which there is not a child put in a fatal situation is Marguerite, and as a result, many people predicted that would win because it stood out for being the least depressing. But Skin was a good short, but a very uncomfortable short, because it showcases a racial war between a group of white skinheads and the black people that they terrorized. And Skin was interestingly the most star-powered short because it featured, what's her name, Danielle McDonald, who was in movies like Patty Cakes and Dumplin', and there are two kids in this movie who kind of have some high-profile roles. I was wondering, when I was watching it, they looked familiar, and I looked them up, and turns out the kids were played by Jackson Robert Scott, who played Georgie in the 2017 remake of It, and Lonnie Chavis, who currently plays young Randall on This Is Us. These short films don't really have too many people with somewhat star power, but Skin did. I don't know if Oscar voters made that connection like I did, but anyway, I personally would have liked to have seen Mother win, because while it was one of the shorts featuring a child put in a life or death situation, how they managed to portray it was quite interesting, because we never see the child in danger physically. We only hear him on the phone because he's on vacation with his father and can't find him, so he's calling his mother asking for help. And all we see is her in her house on the phone trying to tell her son what to do. And it's very tense and dramatic and with some fantastic, incredible acting. Best Documentary Short Subject. These were all pretty solid for the most part. Period End of Sentence was my personal second choice to win this. And it's a very uplifting documentary about these women in a rural village in India who learn how to make their own sanitary pads for when they have their period. And in India, menstruation has often been an extremely taboo topic, even more taboo than it is in the United States. So these women are working to change that taboo. And it was a very good short, although my personal pick to win was Endgame, which, while it was definitely not the most happy documentary, it certainly provided an interesting look at the lives of these terminally ill people and how they interact with their friends and family and their doctors while making their final wishes on how they want to spend their last days. Do they want to die at home, die in the hospital? You know, it really provides a lot of food for thought as to what you might want when you become terminally ill. Best Documentary Feature. Free Solo certainly was an interesting documentary, and certainly a very gripping one with a lot of adrenaline moments, especially when Alex Honnold is climbing El Capitan free solo without any safety gear. But personally, I would have liked to have seen RBG win, because it did make my top 15 list of last year. And while it is a biographical documentary, and we've seen many of them before, it does an excellent job of showcasing Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life, her work, her legacy, and the impact she's had on the American legal system. And it was just an absolutely wonderful tribute to a very powerful, trailblazing woman. Best Foreign Language Film. Roma easily deserved to win this. The other films I did see, Never Look Away was the only one I didn't get to see. They were all either really good or just okay, but Roma easily stood out because you really rooted for the family being portrayed in this film. You rooted for their housekeeper slash maid, Cleo, who was the main character, and it's very rare when we see these stories told from a domestic worker's point of view, and it certainly was a very interesting point of view. And just everything from the acting, the directing, the writing, the editing, the cinematography, the sound, it just came together to create one of the most unique foreign language films I've ever seen. Best Animated Feature. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was really good, although I felt there were some side characters that should have been fleshed out a little more, which is why I couldn't give it my highest rating. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, because almost everyone, it seems, has picked Spider-Man as their favorite animated movie of last year. Personally, my favorite animated movie was Incredibles 2. Is it better than the first Incredibles? No, but it comes very close for the most part. And considering the fact that we had to wait 14 years for this movie, it was easily worth the wait. And to me, it was the best animated film I saw last year. Best Original Screenplay. Green Book's screenplay was good. You know, it helped the movie work for the most part, although it's certainly not a perfect movie by any standard. But it didn't really scream Oscar-worthy screenplay to me in either a nomination or a win. Personally, I would have liked to have seen The Favorite win, because while I don't necessarily think the most dialogue-heavy film should always win, and in this case The Favorite was the most dialogue-heavy film, in this case The Favorite was easily the best of these screenplays because it was both very dramatic as well as very comedic, and the actors really knew how to play off each other with the lines that they were given, especially with the three lead actresses, Olivia Colman, Rachel Weisz, and Emma Stone. The way they just tossed their lines against each other was just absolutely incredible to watch. Best Adapted Screenplay. BlacKkKlansman was easily the deserving winner here. Spike Lee is now an official Oscar winner. He did receive an honorary Oscar a couple of years ago, but you don't have to compete against anybody for that, but here he did have to compete, and he won, so Spike Lee is now finally an Academy Award winning writer-director. And I'll talk more about his speech when we get to my favorite speeches, but BlacKkKlansman, the way that film was written, how it managed to be very dramatic, but also at times very funny, which I didn't think could be possible for a movie like this. But either way, when the comedy hits, it hits. When the drama hits, it hits. And it just literally hooked me, and I could not look away no matter what. It kept me on the edge of my seat, and that's what I always want my number one film of each year to do. Best Supporting Actor. Like I've said in all my other videos, Mahershala Ali was really good in Green Book. He gave the best performance in the movie, but I would have liked to have seen Richard E. Grant win for Can You Ever Forgive Me, because the way his character, despite being a pretty bad person and almost coming across as a stereotype, he still manages to be very compelling, and the chemistry he has with Melissa McCarthy is just absolutely incredible. They're both very bad people, but because of their chemistry, you're just very curious as to what they're going to do next. Best Supporting Actress. So glad Regina King won here. There was a lot of worry of whether or not she could win here, given that she missed some pretty big precursors like Screen Actors Guild and BAFTA, where she was snubbed at both of those, and those award shows tend to be more indicative of what the Oscars will go for. So it was kind of seen as a toss-up between her and Rachel Weisz for The Favorite. But thankfully Regina King won, and well-deserved, because her performance in If Beale Street Could Talk is a very loving and very powerful performance, and also a very quiet performance. And by quiet, I mean she doesn't resort to scenery chewing or loud dramatic moments like we see in a lot of films. Not that that's a bad thing. So she's more toned down and reserved with her performance, because that's kind of how her character is. However, when she needs to make a statement, she'll make that statement, and she'll let the person who she's making that statement to know what she thinks, no holds barred, and in those particular scenes, she is just amazing. Best Actor. Rami Malek was really good in Bohemian Rhapsody, and I know a lot of people are glad to see him win, although I personally would have liked to have seen Willem Dafoe win for At Eternity's Gate. I know he had no chance at all to actually win, because his nomination was considered somewhat of a surprise, because he'd been nominated at the Golden Globes and Critics' Choice but missed out on big precursors like Screen Actors Guild and BAFTA. But At Eternity's Gate was the best film out of the films on this list, and while I don't necessarily think the best acting performance goes with the best film all the time, in this case, to me, it did. Willem Dafoe, kind of like with Regina King, his performance isn't really resorting to scenery chewing or loud dramatic moments, although he does have dramatic moments when we see Vincent van Gogh going through his mental breakdowns, but how he manages to portray Vincent van Gogh just as a painter and as a person just makes him feel like the most fully realized character of the bunch. And that's what I want to see with any acting winners, who creates the most fully realized character. And Best Actress. This was a huge surprise, because many people thought this would go to Glenn Close for The Wife, because She was on her 7th nomination and she had never won, and many people felt, well, it's her time, let's give it to her now, so that way she can at least be called an Oscar winner for the rest of her life. But in a shock, Olivia Colman won for The Favorite. And this was such a big shock that not even Olivia Colman herself could prepare for it. Her reaction was just priceless. And her performance in The Favorite was excellent. Although personally I would have liked to have seen Lady Gaga win for A Star is Born, because Lady Gaga really won me over as an actress with this performance. I hadn't always been the biggest fan of her in terms of her music, and I'd heard her acting on things like American Horror Story was just pretty much kind of resorting to her Lady Gaga pop star shtick. But here she sheds all of that and creates more of a rock star than like pop star, but also creates a fully fleshed out human being who has a lot of hopes and ambitions, and how we see her achieve those while at the same time struggling to support Bradley Cooper's character, because as her career rises, his career is falling, and how she does all that considering that Bradley Cooper was making his directorial debut, and for a directorial debut to get that kind of performance, it's just incredible. Best Director. Alfonso Cuarón's direction with Roma was really great, although I think Spike Lee should have won for BlacKkKlansman, because, like I said before, that was my favorite film of last year. But I'm at least glad he now has an Oscar, at least for Best Adapted Screenplay. And Best Picture. I don't necessarily hate Green Book. I had it in my honorable mentions for my best films of 2018. But it was pretty low on my Best Picture ranking, because my Best Picture ranking overall was this: BlacKkKlansman, Roma, A Star is Born, The Favorite, Black Panther, Green Book, Vice, and Bohemian Rhapsody. So it was number 6 out of these 8 nominees. And some people are already comparing it to some of the most controversial Best Picture Oscar winners of all time, like How Green Was My Valley, which beat Citizen Kane, Shakespeare in Love, which beat Saving Private Ryan, and Crash, which beat Brokeback Mountain, and all those films are often regarded as being better than those Best Picture winners for those years. I wouldn't say it's more egregious than some of those wins. Like, I consider Shakespeare in Love's win to be more egregious, because when Shakespeare in Love beat Saving Private Ryan, it beat a film that literally redefined how World War II movies were made. And Saving Private Ryan is considered one of the greatest American war films of all time. With Green Book, the acting is good and the writing and directing are fine, maybe not extraordinary, but it works for the most part, although there are some cringeworthy moments of dialogue and there's some very awkward moments in certain situations. Of course, there's been many who've called it a white savior movie, and yeah, at times Viggo Mortensen's character of Tony Vallelonga isn't the most likable guy, and I get that the film is about him trying to become a better person and learning to kind of change his views, because in the beginning of the film he isn't exactly the most friendly towards black people, and then near the end of the film he is. So, it's not really anything we haven't seen before, even if this is based on a true story. And of course it's been compared a lot to Driving Miss Daisy, with its premise of a white and black person in a car driving around a lot, only this time the races are reversed. And of course, like Driving Miss Daisy, this had the unfortunate timing of beating out a Spike Lee film, because when Driving Miss Daisy came out, it got more nominations than Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which wasn't even nominated for Best Picture or Best Director. And this, of course, beat out BlacKkKlansman, which would have been my personal choice to win here. And Spike Lee's reaction to Green Book winning was quite something. He apparently got out of his seat and was going to storm out of the theater, but they wouldn't let him, so he went back to his seat with his back turned to the stage. And then in the press room, when asked about Green Book's win, he used a basketball analogy, since Spike Lee is a big New York Knicks fan. He said, "The ref made a bad call." And in this case, I have to agree with him, because BlacKkKlansman was easily the best of these nominees. It was very tense, it was very dramatic, it had amazing writing, directing, acting, editing, cinematography, music, costumes. Everything about this movie worked. Everything fit together as it needed to. I literally could not think of any flaws I had with BlacKkKlansman as a movie. And I like movies that stand out to me in a unique manner every year. And BlacKkKlansman to me was easily the most unique out of these Best Picture nominees and out of all the films I saw last year. Alright, now as for the ceremony. Could the Oscars work without a host? And the answer is, for the most part, yes, it could. Last time the Oscars had no host was in 1989, where there was the infamous Snow White-Rob Lowe duet, among other things. However, no host was the least of that show's problems. It was the Snow White-Rob Lowe musical numbers and everything else that made that ceremony arguably what many consider to be the worst Oscar ceremony of all time. But here everything worked for the most part. Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and Maya Rudolph were hilarious in their opening monologue of sorts and presentation. They seriously should be invited to be next year's hosts. John Mulaney and Awkwafina were really funny, and normally I don't like long presenter banner, but they actually made it funny this time. It was cool with the Best Picture nominees of having some celebrities as well as some non-Hollywood figures like Serena Williams and John Lewis introduce Best Picture nominee clips. And of course for Bohemian Rhapsody they had Mike Myers and Dana Carvey acting like Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World. They didn't necessarily come out in their Wayne and Garth costumes, but they put on the voices. So that was pretty cool. The song performances were pretty good. All the Stars from Black Panther was the only nominee that did not perform. I believe Kendrick Lamar said he had work scheduling conflicts or something that prevented him from attending the ceremony, because he was extended an invitation, but he just wasn't able to make it. The other songs were fine. I'll Fight was okay, but not great. The Place Where Lost Things Go, where it was Bette Midler singing instead of Emily Blunt, that was really good. And then When a Cowboy Trades His Spurs for Wings, different people performing it, because in the film it was performed by Tim Blake Nelson. Here it was performed by their songwriters David Rawlings and Gillian Welch. But of course the best song performance was easily Shallow. Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga were amazing. Their chemistry was off the charts, and for a moment at the end it looked like they were going to kiss each other. But they stopped at the last minute, but they said their intention was to kind of bring back what was felt in the original film, and they certainly did that. Admittedly, at times it was kind of a little awkward when one category was done and they were segueing to another category, because usually it's the host's job to say, and now, insert joke here, please welcome so-and-so. And here they didn't do that, so that did feel a little awkward at times, but for the most part it worked well, especially since everything that happened, this could have been an easy, epic disaster, and thankfully it wasn't. I could go on and on, but those were the highlights, and I want to get to my favorite speeches before my camera battery runs out. So, as for my top 5 speeches, it was hard to decide how I wanted to rank these, because several of them were really, really good. So if I didn't put in your favorite speech, I apologize. But ultimately I decided on this. I put Lady Gaga in 5th place because she was very emotional and she was very sincere, and I loved her message to young artists about never giving up even when it seems like there's no hope for them. It was a beautiful speech, but I put it at the bottom because it's not really anything new she hasn't said before, because she was pretty emotional and said similar things in her Golden Globes and Critics' Choice Awards speeches. At number 4, I put Ruth Carter for Black Panther. You know, here I'm not necessarily judging the winner's speeches by whether or not I thought they were deserving to win, but rather how they came across in their speech. And Ruth Carter provided a good example of how to do a speech that was pretty much written on a piece of paper. You know, the Vice makeup team was the bad example, she was the good example. So while she was just clearly reading from a speech she wrote, she at least knew what she wanted to say, who she wanted to thank, and she took her time in the spotlight to make herself be heard to all the people she was thanking. And then in third place, I have Spike Lee. His reaction to winning was just pure joy. I mean, he literally leapt out of his seat when Samuel L. Jackson announced him as the winner. And of course, the two of them have worked together on many, many movies. And Spike Lee literally jumped into his arms when he came up on stage. I mean, and like jumped as in his feet were literally off the ground. And you'll see many photos showcasing that. And, you know, while his speech wasn't necessarily a list of all the cast and crew members of BlacKkKlansman, I think in terms of talking about politics and family, he did it the right way. You know, he urged people to vote in the 2020 presidential election, and he also lovingly thanked his grandmother, who he said helped save money to put him through film school. So that was an incredible thing I didn't know about him, and it was honestly very touching when he mentioned that. Number two, I generally try not to do ties, but in this case I couldn't help myself because I literally could not choose, so I'm going to pick all three of the teams from all three short film winners. Documentary, live action, animation. They were all so joyful, so enthusiastic when they won. This literally served as proof of why all 24 Oscar categories need to be presented live on the air. This year did not mark the first time in which there had been discussions about cutting categories. I've heard many people think that the short film categories should be relegated to commercial breaks or presented at a specific ceremony because in these commenters' views, nobody cares about them. And while the general public might not necessarily care about them, I can assure you that film lovers like myself do. We take the chance to see them when we can. They're often put together in these packages that are played at like art house theaters. And these short films can be so good that the winners really do deserve their time in the spotlight on TV, along with actors, directors, cinematographers, etc. And these winners were all so joyful and excited, and they were like, woo! I mean, not like as in a boastful, yeah, I'm better than everyone else type of way, but rather just pure joy and excitement, like, yes, we worked so hard, we won, woo! And they were all very passionate in their acceptance speeches, so I can't fault them for that, because people should be excited when they get awards. I mean, not like too over the top excited. Don't act like you're sleepwalking either, like some people do when they win an award. And then finally, the best acceptance speech, and this is pretty much everyone's best acceptance speech, and rightfully so, is Olivia Colman for The Favorite. I mean, talk about a genuine reaction. I mean, she obviously didn't think she was going to win based on her reaction alone. There was shock in the audience because I think many of them expected to hear Glenn Close's name announced, but once the shock kind of subsided, there was applause because, you know, you got to applaud for all the winners no matter what to be nice. But I do think there were a lot of people who were generally enthusiastic about her win because obviously she received enough votes to win. And Emma Stone stood up and gave her a tearful standing ovation because, of course, she was her co-star in The Favorite. And then when she finally got to the stage, she clearly didn't know what to say. She was like, but when she finally started talking, she just strung together the best speech that she could. See, this is what most people like to see at award shows. The one person who didn't expect to win and now has to give a speech and is trying to think about what they want to say. And while she clearly was unprepared, she at least knew who she wanted to thank. You know, she thanked her director, her husband, her children, her cast members, her fellow nominees, especially Glenn Close. You know, she even said, I didn't expect to win over you. And this actually reminded me a lot of another famous upset race back in the 90s when Juliette Binoche famously won Best Supporting Actress for The English Patient in a major upset over Lauren Bacall for The Mirror Has Two Faces, because like Glenn Close, Lauren Bacall was this big industry legend who had never won a competitive Oscar, and many felt that it was now her time to win. But instead, Juliette Binoche won because the Oscars really, really love The English Patient because it won 9 Oscars, including Best Picture. The video today might be a little awkward to watch because the one who presented Juliette Binoche with her Oscar was Kevin Spacey, and yeah, we all know Kevin Spacey's career is pretty much dead forever. But Juliette Binoche, like Olivia Colman, she was very shocked. She clearly didn't think she was going to win, and like Olivia Colman, Juliette Binoche admitted in her speech, she thought Lauren Bacall was going to win. She was just like, thank you, so-and-so, bye. Although her speech was much shorter than Olivia Colman's, so Olivia Colman's was a little bit longer, but still it provided a great reaction from someone who clearly didn't think they were actually going to win. And because the Oscars are often accused of being too predictable, of the same winners winning at every award show, but even they clearly sometimes pick someone else, and clearly shows sometimes, yes, they do watch the movie if the supposed frontrunner can be dethroned by someone else. Of course, this now makes Glenn Close the most losing actress ever in Oscar history, with 7 nominations and no win, but you know, she's still working, and maybe she'll make another movie where she gets a nomination and maybe a win, so it ain't over till it's over. So at the very least, it's not over until Glenn Close either retires from acting or dies. So until either of those two things happen, she could still win an Oscar someday. That's my message to you big Glenn Close fans out there. So those are my thoughts on the winners and the ceremony. And also, of course, before I finish this video, I should mention of the historic firsts that happened that are worth mentioning about, regardless of what I or everyone else might have thought personally about all the winners. This was a history-making night for many reasons. This year had the record number of female winners ever for an Oscar ceremony, with 15 women winning, and while that might not seem like a lot, and admittedly it's not compared to the amount of men that tend to win every year, it's still significant in the fact that we're now slowly starting to see more female nominees in like the tech categories every year, and the other in categories like shorts and documentaries and things like that. And while there's still a long way to go in terms of becoming truly equal in Hollywood in terms of gender representation, as well as, you know, racial and sexual orientation and religious representation and things like that, this shows that we're slowly but surely getting there. And also, of course, last night had a record number of black winners at the Oscars in one night, with 7 winners overall, and many of them making history for the first time, with Hannah Beachler becoming the first black production designer to win an Oscar, Ruth Carter becoming the first black costume designer to win an Oscar, and Peter Ramsey becoming the first animator to win a Best Animated Feature Oscar. And also there's Rami Malek. Rami Malek is the first actor of Middle Eastern descent to win a Best Actor Oscar. So overall, no matter what anyone thinks of the winners, of whether or not they were deserving to win or not, it's still nice to see some diversity in the overall winners, and it's nice to see some barriers, whether it be gender or race, finally be broken in certain categories to show that Hollywood really is starting to slowly but surely move in the right direction towards better diversity. So to those winners, congratulations on making history. Well, that was a lot, but those are my thoughts on this year's Oscar winners and the ceremony itself. Let me know in the comment section below what you thought of this year's Oscar ceremony, the winners and everything else in between. And please subscribe to my channel if you've not yet already done so, so you can get all my new videos as soon as they're uploaded. It's probably going to be a little while before my next video comes out, because the next couple of months tend to be a lull in terms of awards and things like that. But I will be back soon with another video. It will probably be my Saturn Awards nominations video. I'm not sure when those nominations will come out, probably sometime in March, and when I get to making the video, it'll probably be maybe late March, early April, depending on what's going on in my life at that time, but I will get it out eventually, I promise you that. And until that time, I will see you guys next time. Bye.